So a very good evening to all our members of the Bengal Club who are here from across the puddles and across the ponds, and the guests who have so enthusiastically joined our January book club discussion today. I'm expecting we are going to have a few more visitors over the next few minutes, but I think we should start because there are a lot of there's a lot of ground to cover. I'm Julie Mehta, and on behalf of the Bengal Club Library Subcommittee, it's a great pleasure to welcome everyone on board. And I think the reason we choose our books for the month is because they're usually topical, or they're making news in some way, or there is a great interest in either reviving these stories or an interest in the author. I'm so happy that we can present Shyam Salvatore, who is known through his work to many of us on this platform today. And this time I think I selected him because his book, Funny Boy, has been made into a film by Deepa Mehta and released on the 10th of December. Shyam is no stranger to the Bengal Club. This was taken when he visited Harish and I about 4 years ago. The next slide, please. Lovely. And we'll follow it up with a video clip of what he says about the Bengal Club so that we all can have a little laugh. So go ahead, Gurudas, show us that little clip where he talks about the club.
Yes, ma'am.
Dear members,
little louder.
Dear members of the Bengal Club Book Club, I'm very honored that you are doing my Funny Boy, and truly wish I was there in person, because the most delicious meal I've ever had, the most delicious Indian meal I've ever had, was at the Bengal Club, and I still think about it quite often, especially in the winter here, in the middle of a pandemic. And Calcutta is my favorite Indian city, and I say that having traveled a lot in India. So I'm doubly thrilled that you're doing my book, and I hope you enjoy it.
So Shyam Salvatore, the author of Funny Boy, our book up for discussion tonight, was born in Colombo in 1965. When he was 19, Shyam and his family came to Canada, fleeing the civil war sparked by the terrible race riots of 1983 specifically. But of course, we know that the history of the Tamil Sinhala conflict go right back to the 1950s. Hundreds of thousands were slaughtered in the once idyllic Isle of Sri Lanka. The horror of the Tamil Sinhalese battle, brought very close to home, literally and figuratively, is revisited and represented with the veracity and urgency in the novel we are discussing today. Shyam had a kind of lived experience in Colombo, and the national history of Sri Lanka intersects with a remarkable immediacy through the eyes of the young protagonist, R.G. Chelvaratnam. Shyam Salvatore studied creative writing and theatre at York University in Toronto, Canada, and went on to write his first novel, Funny Boy, at 29, which kind of catapulted him to fame. It won him the prestigious Lambda Literary Award in the United States and named a notable book of the American Library Association. Back in his new homeland, Canada, Funny Boy was a national bestseller, winner of the W.H. Smith Book in Canada First Novel Award. The story explores the young Tamil school-going boy R.G. Chelvaratnam's homosexuality, and the author's insightful and lyrical style shines light on identity, citizenship, belonging, not just as a new refugee in Canada, but also in a left behind birthplace, homeland that was Sri Lanka. Little wonder then that Funny Boy was one of the 3 most popular novels in all the courses that I taught at the University of Toronto. Its global reach has been a happy surprise. This year, Funny Boy is also on the MA syllabus of Calcutta University. I think Professor Choitali Mitro and I are both very happy that finally new literature is finding ways in which to address global issues, especially with the Black Lives Matter initiative. And my young scholar friend, Rohini Chakraborty, who's right here from JU Center for Canadian Studies, as is Ragini Chakraborty, all the way from Illinois University, who's going to be speaking to us, are familiar, because I think Jadavpur is a bit more progressive in its embracing of world literature. But to get on with Shyam's career, his second novel, Cinnamon Gardens, 4 years later in 1998, was shortlisted for the Trillium Award. And it was widely published in Europe, United States, and in India. In 2013, he wrote Hungry Ghosts, which was shortlisted again for the Governor General's Award for Canada and listed for other prizes. Shyam is also the author of Swimming in the Monsoon Sea, also shortlisted for the Governor General's Award. He edited 2 engaging anthologies of stories, which you might know about, Storywala, very popular in India, and Many Roads Through Paradise, a collection of short stories by Sri Lankan writers. Now, what's very interesting about Shyam, as I found out when in the early 2000s, I invited him to my classes in Toronto and found that he had an immediate access and an immediate connection. He was a kind of hybrid in so many different ways that he was constantly negotiating identity in a place like Canada. His Tamilian father, David, and his mother, Sinhalese, Christine, who's a doctor, I think made it very encouraging, the home space where Shyam could be what he wanted to be. And his father, who was actually a Davis Club player in Sri Lanka, was forced to teach tennis as a tennis coach so that Shyam and the family could have a better and a happier the book Funny Boy gestures towards this fear of being poor in a new land. But despite the hardships, what's interesting again, with the 3rd generation immigrants from Asia, South Asia, from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, as well as Bangladesh in Toronto, is that he finds Canada is the home, and I quote him, he feels the freedom to write in and live his life without being ostracized as gay. The Time magazine essay he wrote about the frightening experience of being hounded early one morning by the army and the police when he was visiting with his partner, Andrew Champion, in Colombo, left him really unnerved. And I think that's one of the reasons that he could live his sexual orientation without fear, made him comfortable in Canada. Well, he still visits Sri Lanka and has run the Sri Lankan Literary Festival for several years. And like so many frontline global writers who have their origins in Sri Lanka. And I'm thinking Michael Ondaatje, Romesh Gunasekara, Rienzi Cruz, so many others. Shyam's work is enriched by many homes at many times of many spaces. Several of our responders today will speak about this liminality and the contestations which they make into opportunities as writers, and how they negotiate the eddies in this liminal world. Many of us live in different homes, in different times of our lives, and many of us here on this platform are out of country that we were born. So I hope that you will enjoy the trajectory that we have set for the rest of the evening. And before we start on the speakers, I've asked Gurudash to show us a short clip, a trailer of the film by Deepa Mehta. Really, it puts us in the picture with what was really going on and the experiences of this little boy. The trailer of Funny Boy, and then members' responses to Funny Boy, and then guests' responses. I will call you out, so don't worry about the lineup. Enjoy. So Gurudash, let's have the clip.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you have to find a way not to let these boring people rob you of your precociousness. What you've got to do is this. Don't mess with the grand diva.
Don't mess with the grand diva.
Yes!
Sonali, would you take Arji as your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Arji, would you take Sonali as your lawfully wedded husband? I do.
Different is wonderful.
He's your funny boy.
And you are different.
You're a pansy, a sissy, a fat.
Welcome to Victoria Academy, Arjun Shelvaratnam.
Every human creature is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other. Hi.
So who cares if he's Sinhalese, Aman? I like him.
Auntie will never be allowed into any of our houses if she marries a Sinhalese.
I saw you both. It's dangerous and it's illegal.
Women and children all butchered simply because we are Tamil. I just can't.
We don't want you here anymore.
So, what do we do?
Will it make you happy?
Why does everyone say I'm funny? What does that mean?
Aj, you're only 8 years old. What do you know about love?
Don't mess with the grand diva.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself, please.
Yes. Professor Choitali Moitro, will you go for it?
Yes, of course.
My first speaker.
Good evening.
Remember, speakers, good evening. Just remember, speakers, since we have a lot of voices, and I think that's what enriches this experience at Bengal Club, that we, we let as many voices in as we can in the time specified. Please keep your responses to 3 minutes. Then we can all, have a say. So go for it, Choitali.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for setting the tone with that trailer. Well, I would first like to say that after reading the book, this film is, of course, a pudding. What to say, it's just excellent. But reading the book, I felt the tremor of self-respect and the pulsating and disturbing political backdrop juxtaposed side by side. And through this, there is a trajectory that the novel covers through 6 chapters, and it creates a space for Arjee, the protagonist. By the time Arjee gets settled in Canada, I thought it's me suffering. So the novel is able to rise above the gender issues and make me feel that probably in today's times, everything centered around the word identity can mean so much, can be so convoluted. And apart from this, I feel like talking about 2 or 3 very important presences. One is the presence of the family through Ammachi and Appachi, and how the family issue comes, intersects, influences, gives in, takes away through Arjee's characters to his development of being the adult, the self-realized adult. And I would also like to talk about the 6 headings of the 6 stories. And I feel like saying that before we see the film, if we read the book, these 6 stories should be taken, or it could be understood as the deepening of one single nucleus. The names are very, very subtle and satirical. See, look at the names: Pigs Can't Fly, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, The Best School of All, The Riot Journal. All these names are satirical, but they sort of deepen the sensibility of Arjee. So that is something which I liked. And the treatment of time. Time is treated telescopically. I feel like mentioning the presence of Jagan, and of course the death of Uncle Daryl, where time doesn't remain limited only to Arjee's life. So it brings in his parents, their lives, especially his mother in this sense, and the entire narrative becomes richer and more meaningful. And finally, I think I shouldn't be taking more time. I want to round off by sort of supporting the comment which I heard from Deepa Mehta, saying that all sorts of religion or religious attitudes are brought in. And she says roughly these words: being Hindu, Muslim, Christian is bad. Give the humanity a chance. So this "give the humanity a chance" is a phrase which does have global reach, as Julie pointed out just now. And with this global reach, we could reach out to the politics of representation and identity understood. Thank you.
Choitali, as usual, you do such a good, resounding unveiling as my first speaker. What I would like to gesture towards is the importance of what you have brought out by way of the globalism today, and why this book is more pertinent than ever. And I think the question of whether we really become, in the way that Stuart Hall talks about, you know, the evolution of the self in a new space, with so many of us global souls flitting about different countries and different nations, I think this point will be addressed. I know Ragini Chakraborty, who is a doctoral student at the University of Chicago at Illinois, will be talking about that. But I'm guessing that there'll be a lot of other people who will be addressing the contestation and the discomfort that we turn into opportunities in our lived experience. So with that, I'd like to turn to Dr. Harish Mehta. Harish, what would you have to say about the novel as a historian? And please, everyone, 3 minutes.
So I think the Sri Lankan story is one of deep tragedy. Certainly, a lot of Sri Lankans who have left the country, their homeland, have made success stories out of their lives. But the Sri Lankan story is one of deep tragedy. because while a lot of the more fortunate Sri Lankans who could travel abroad as refugees, those who stayed behind were killed over the years, and that's how the story ended for them. So the roots of this problem, of this great tragedy, go back to very quickly, go back to who are the Sinhalese majority. So by and large, it is believed that around the 6th century before the birth of Christ, the Sinhalese arrived in Sri Lanka, and they are supposedly they came from somewhere in North India. And then perhaps 4 centuries after them, the Tamils arrived. And these are called the Sri Lankan Tamils. The original wave of Tamils that reached Sri Lanka 2 centuries before the birth of Christ were called the Sri Lankan Tamils. And under the British rule, the British brought in another category of Tamils to the country, which were known as estate Tamils or plantation Tamils, that was supposed to work on the various agricultural plantations that the British colonial empire ran over there. So while all this was happening, the British created a structure of schools, and by and large, most of these schools were supposedly located in the areas where the Tamils were, which meant that the Tamils got better education because those missionary schools were located in the Tamil areas, and therefore the Sinhalese who lived in other spaces in Sri Lanka didn't have the same opportunities. So during the British rule, a situation arose where the bureaucracy was staffed largely by the Tamil community because they knew English, they were well educated, they were smart. So after the British rule, starting in the 1950s, British rule ends in 1948, and by 1952, the first of the pogroms, the killings of Tamils starts, and this continues in waves. And by the 1970s, the Tamils have had enough, and they begin calling for an autonomous state, not a separate state. They begin calling for autonomy for their areas in the northern parts of the peninsula of Jaffna. But there was no peace talks. Talks with the Sri Lankan government of the time collapsed, and then the Tamil youth sets itself up in a bunch of militant outfits that fight the Sri Lankan military, the Indian, and it becomes very complex, and then it becomes the infighting between these groups. The Indian government comes in at some point and it says it strikes a deal with the Sri Lankan government that it will restore peace, and it sends a peacekeeping force to Sri Lanka. The peacekeeping force, the mandate was basically to keep peace, but they very quickly get sucked into anti-guerrilla warfare, and they begin trying to hunt down the Tamil Tigers, the main liberation army of the Tamils, but they don't succeed. So the Indians pull out, and then there's a long period of negotiations, etc. And finally, very recently, a few years ago, is the last blowout when the Sri Lankan army launches a bombardment and it kills all remaining civilians and militants. So the movement ends at that point in time. And then that gives rise to various calls in the United Nations and outside for a peace, for a tribunal to investigate war crimes committed by the Sri Lankans. One of the Sri Lankan leaders, the president Rajapaksa, was considered a war criminal of the first order by one of the tribunals. But the Sri Lankan government has continually denied these allegations that any of this happened. Meanwhile, independent assessments and investigations have shown massive killings, systematic annihilation of the Sri Lankans through various measures, disenfranchisement, removal from their positions, denial of basic rights, and of course, eventually warfare. So that's the historical background. And if it ends in tragedy, there is no other way to describe it. It is a modern day war crime that has gone unanswered because the Sri Lankan government is not a signatory to a very important, the so-called Rome Agreement, which makes it incumbent on Sri Lanka to be answerable. So Sri Lanka has very cleverly kept out of those agreements, and it has escaped. It has escaped censure at the UN and periodic noises being made by the United States and the European Union have no effect on that country. So that's it. And the Tamil community, meanwhile, is non-existent practically in Sri Lanka in any shape or form. But they exist certainly in the diaspora. And Shyam Salvatore is a prime example of how erudite and they come from scholarly families. They're well educated, and they continued. They did. I mean, till the last fight that the Sri Lankan army put up, and they bombed them and destroyed all of them a few years ago. Prior to that, the Sri Lankans, Tamils, used to be appalled at the silence of the Canadian government at these massacres. So for a few days, they blockaded all the major highways, the Queen Elizabeth Way, the 401 highway, all the major expressways in the evening, preventing Canadians from going home or coming into Toronto. And guess what happened? The white Canadian majority said, don't do this. This is not our problem. This is your problem. You sort it out with your government back home. So this is the problem of being a diasporic soul living in a foreign country, because the country doesn't see you and your baggage as anything that they have to do with. It's your problem. And so that's how the thing ends. And of course, while all that goes on, I must point out, of course, that the Tamil community is extremely well off economically. They do very well in Canada. These are not your sweepers and sort of blue collar workers. By and large, the Tamil community is white collar, well educated, university degrees, lawyers, bankers, and of course writers. Thank you.
Thank you, Harish. You've gone way over the time, but it's been it's been very enriching, and it actually has opened up a little gateway to share an image that I have from my time with my class when this was happening, when these peaceful protests by young people and old in Toronto were happening. But we will hold on to that. Let's have the next speaker, and Anushuya, we would love to hear your views. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. It's just been too interesting to listen to all of you, and my Wi-Fi isn't the best, so I'm going to keep it as short as possible. I'd much rather listen, but it's this book has really throughout the narrative, and like we had from the first speaker, it takes you into a telescopic view of each stage in Arjun's life. And when he does emerge into adulthood, the subtext that conveys to the reader about the confusion inside him and the wanting to be accepted as a normal person vis-a-vis his not being a normal person, I think that was very loud in the way the best school was narrated. Throughout that was vibrating in the background. And I felt, the pathos lying inside him when everything was upset in his life. His reality was getting upset. He was getting upset within vis-a-vis his relationship with the boy, I forget his name. and he's wanting to be accepted and consequently getting rejected by his mother. So all of those things were kind of said and not said and left for you to understand, and that was rather loud in that section. And also what Harish said about what happens to the people who relocate. I mean, the problem was in their own birthplace, they were kind of seen but not seen. You know, they were not being acknowledged for being as intelligent and accomplished as a race of people. And they went away to a space where they probably hoped to be so. But given the information that Harish has just shared about the fact that they are in fact lawyers, bankers, writers, and on the higher level of the strata in terms of accomplishments, the pain of not being seen doesn't go away. I mean, neither in your own land nor in the land of your choice are you being seen. And that's a pain that's very deep within. At some point, you want to call out and tell your people around you, see me for who I am. You know, and I felt like even when I went onto YouTube to listen to him, I wonder if he has reconciled to that, or is that still work in progress? So maybe you could move on to the next speaker, because I'm really finding it difficult to hear a bit.
Anusuya, I think what we carry from your experience, what you've taken away from Funny Boy is, again, as I said, central to the issue. Here I am, see me. I'm not a visible minority. I'm visible.
I am not. Yes, absolutely. That was coming out loud.
Yes.
And he was blessed to be articulate about it. And there are plenty who can't articulate their pain.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
he spoke for a lot of people. Yeah,
Yes.
he spoke for a lot of people. And while this is entirely a racial contextual story, we would see this in many interpersonal relationships, you know,
Yes,
where
totally.
The denial of the other person's accomplishments lies in not seeing that person.
Yes, I'm looking
You know,
really
it's a
forward.
psychological game.
Yes, I'm looking greatly forward to, I think, several other speakers who will be, touching upon this point, because he's doubly othered. The alterity is on two levels. First, he is a person, as they say in North America, and I can't stand it, but I say it in quotes, a person of color. He's a person of color. And secondly, he's outside the normative sexual orientation. So as a homosexual, it becomes doubly challenging to forge an identity that makes him have his self-esteem intact. But of course, someone like Shyam is a very strong person, and he's forged out his life wonderfully. So Anusuya, thank you for that. The next person I think I might call out is Mr. Prabhir Dashgupta. Prabhir, will you have a word? Unmute yourself. Thank you. Thank you.
Please. Sorry for this little sort of interruption. Basically, I found this to be a very nice family saga, upper middle class family, well settled, very well off in life, very closely bound with a lot of culture ties, etc. Trying to integrate with the majority Tamil community. That's one side of the story. And there is a foreboding of the cataclysm which will befall and overtake them with time. There are hints of that. And finally, we see what is happening. That's one thread of the story, finally sort of devolving into persons of no status, refugees. And the parallel thread is one of Arjun, his discovery of his identity, in various stages of life, and how it intervenes with the family saga. It's very nicely written. And all I can say is that it's a beautiful read. The words are very nicely selected, and he's a wordsmith in the true sense of the term. The other thing I just wanted to add, really nothing to do with, but a bit on what Harish had to say, because I visited Sri Lanka quite recently, and I found that there are 20 to 30% of the people are still Tamil speaking. And as he said rightly, there are two categories. There are Ceylonese Tamils who have been there for almost 800,000 years. And the others are the plantation Tamils who came in much later to work in the plantations. And they are still there. I met a lot of them, but obviously did not discuss politics. I don't know what is their status, but obviously they were well educated and possibly still continue to wield a fair amount of influence in Sri Lankan society, but virtually with no political power, if I may say so. And the other thing is that what we fail to understand is that this conflict also brought the Sri Lankan people who were very peaceful and peace-loving and Buddhist, it over a period of about 2 to 3 decades, they became, rightly or wrongly, virtually, bloodthirsty, sanguinary, sort of lot of people who were out to crush the Tamil rebellion. But the LTTE was also an extremely ruthless guerrilla organization. One of the most feared and most ruthless guerrilla organizations in the world. A lot has been written about them and how they've trained their guerrillas, but that's another story. I shall end for now because I'm sure there are a lot of others who would like to contribute more on this. Thank you so much.
Prabhir, as usual, on point, and you've very well textured Harish's historical thoughts. I'd like to pick up one thing from you, and that is when you said that they were always a peace-loving people. This is so true, because I think there are a few of us on this forum, like our friend from the UK, Mr. Nitin Gupta, and we share this huge respect and affinity we have with Buddhism. And the way Sinhalese monks have been involved in the brutality with the Tamils in the last, I think, 2 decades especially, is quite astonishing, actually. For those of us who believe in the tenets of Buddhism, we can't really think of that, because this would be unheard, unseen in a place like Thailand, for instance, which practices Hinayana Buddhism. So, just keeping that thought in mind, let's move on to Professor Otish Mitro, joining us from Montana, all the way from Montana. Woken him up. Sorry, Otish, again, but would love to hear your views. Unmute.
Thank you, Julie. So I think it'll be simplistic for me to say that this story is a gay coming of age story. As you see, as we have seen that his sexual orientation, though a major thread in the book, is not the only thread. Another equally major thread is this Tamil Sinhalese conflict. So I would instead say that it is a story about a boy who possibly feels different from other boys his age, and hence grows up emotionally isolated in a otherwise very loving family. So many of us who grow up in families where large groups of kids grow up together, we certainly know that it can produce interesting and sometimes maybe painful dynamics. So in this book, RG grows up in this loving family, but I think soon figures out as he grows up from a very young age that people around him, otherwise loving people, have already classified and decided how everyone should act, and not only act, but also how everyone should feel. So his father calls certain characteristics for boys funny, and his mother prohibits simple activities such as boys playing a game like bride, as pigs shouldn't fly, pigs can fly. And as he grows up, his aunt he notices that is not allowed to date people from other communities, because people have decided that people usually marry people of their own kind. So he is isolated emotionally, and hence he probably grows up more perceptive, and that's why I think Radha auntie confides in him, sort of is more open to him, and he is perceptive enough to figure out his mother's affair with this uncle. So overall, classifying the story and thinking about it, to me, it seems that it is a story about a boy growing up and almost by himself, and thus developing a strong sense of individual identity. And he grows up against a society intent on insisting that everyone conforms to their rules. And you started this session by saying that we choose topical books. So I think this book is quite topical in this sense, because all uh, around us, not only in India or in America, but everywhere in the world, we have seen recently in our times that the community seems to be ready to decide how others should eat, how they should pray, and if we don't conform, then people are in trouble. So in that sense, I think the book you chose is quite topical. Yeah, I think I'll stop at this point.
Thank you, Otish. As usual, you always bring out the topicality factor, and you also relate it to the identity issues that we talk about in our beliefs and how patriarchy works in wanting people to conform in a heterogeneous form than in a form which is in a homogeneous form than in a heterogeneous form, because that always threatens the center of power. But the margins should not really have a presence. So beautifully articulated. The member we have next, Dr. Parumita Mukherjee Malik, is not with us, but Gurudash, may we play her short clip, please?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dr. Parumita Mukherjee Malik from Mumbai. What a beautiful book Funny Boy is. All the short stories, all 6 short stories are really worth reading. I was always feeling while reading the stories that wish I could again become a child. You know, the happiness being a child, being inclusive, believing in fairy tale romance and everything that is nice, and gradually how the child understands what is life, what is the world like. So I just enjoyed reading this book a lot, and I'm sure all of you will. It's a wonderful book, and the weaving of the stories are so beautiful. It gets you, it allows you to get glued to each story. It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, looking greatly forward now to opening up the floor from our members to all of you fine, fair guests. So first on my list is Ragini Chakraborty, who is doing her doctoral studies at the University of Chicago at Illinois, as I said. So Gurudash, may we have Ragini's clip to play for us, please?
Yes,
and she
please.
touches upon a lot of topics which a lot of you have been talking about. Where is home? What is home? Go ahead, Gurudash.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Professor Mehta, for organizing this book club on Salvatore and Funny Boy, a text that I was introduced in my postgraduate years, and a text that I'll always fondly hold close to my heart. I've always had a couple of thoughts when reading the novel, and recently Deepa Mehta's adaptation of Funny Boy released over Netflix. And there has been a furor since then regarding the casting of non-Tamilian actors in the characters of the Tamil, the Tamil protagonists, especially. And that brought me to think about the whole idea of subjects and representation. So I'm thinking about texts which essentially talk about minority issues. How important is representation when we are looking at these texts? In the written text itself, we do not see colors because we don't see the characters as we see in a visual medium as a film. And in a film, all of these cultural markers or religious markers become very important. So that brings me to think about the negotiation that's going on between art and performance on one hand, and the responsibility towards the subject position, towards the experiences of the subject who belongs to the minority group, and their agency. So how do we kind of negotiate those two? Are we kind of taking away artistic freedom and freedom of expression if we have to live up to that responsibility? So that's, I guess, something that I have been thinking about. And that also brings me to the second part of the second point that very much caught my attention, is the concept of liminality. And I have been thinking about RG's character and how we can probably look at RG being caught in this liminal space, in the context of his sexuality as well as in the context of his ethnopolitical identity. Can we think about the two texts questioning, dealing with this concept of liminality in similar or different ways? Can we think of RG traveling to Toronto from Sri Lanka, leaving his homeland and going to an adopted homeland, and really becoming somebody other? Can he ever become somebody else? And in that case, can he really transcend that liminal space and get adapted into a different culture? So these are some of the most important thoughts that I would like to share from my reading of Funny Boy, both the novel and the film adaptation. Thank you so much.
Always a stellar scholar. Ragini comes from, cut her teeth with Professor Sucharita Chattopadhyay from the Centre Canada at Jadavpur University, and she's always been beleaguered with this idea of identity. And let me just say that pertaining to Canada, multiculturalism is our mantra. So we've not really walked the talk yet. We talk about it. It's in our legislation, it's in our administrative idea, but we haven't yet quite translated it to the lived experience. So Ragini is on the money. She's absolutely right. I think Sham and people such as the Canadian writers Judy Fong Bates, Kerry Sakamoto, Hiromi Goto, all these people who are diasporic novelists, Anita Rao Badami, they're all working to make the Canadian reader, which is still very much the English canon-oriented Canadian reader, aware of the fringes and the margins, just as Sham is. Rohini, go for it. Rohini is also, actually, Rohini, you're a friend and a colleague of Ragini's, aren't you?
Exactly, ma'am. We were classmates, and that's what I was thinking when she was speaking. Like, we hold the book, like we hold similar emotions for the book Funny Boy, and all the more I would like to mention here, like I feel very proud when I say that this book has been in the syllabus of Jadavpur University, the Department of Comparative Literature, from the year 2000. not only as a part of the Canadian Studies course, it has been part of different other courses. And so like, this is the 21st year that it has been a part of the syllabus. And it makes me really happy to be a part of this discussion session. So thank you, Professor Mehta, for including me in this. So I would just straight jump into my reading of the book. Like, there were very interesting insights. Like, what caught my attention here is how the author juxtaposes an idea of good and evil, and how it kind of develops as RG is growing up, as we see RG going through different phases of life. So I would just like to point out 3 instances from the book. The first would be when he was caught playing Bride by Auntie Kanthi, and he was dragged in front of the whole family, and he was labeled funny when he did not know what it meant, where he was just an innocent kid playing with his cousins. He did not know what bad was, but he understood that, like, the first binary idea of bad and good was instilled in his mind. And the first punishment he had received was he was banned from watching his mother wearing a sari, which he was absolutely obsessed with. So that was probably, for me, his first encounter with the idea of good and evil. Now, jumping on from there, if I like connect the whole novel, what happens is this first idea has a terrible effect on him when he and Shehan have their first sexual intercourse, and he ends up feeling dirty and filthy, and he blames the whole thing on Shehan. Initially, the initial reaction happens like that. Then he slowly realizes that all Shehan was doing was giving him all the love that he could give. That's when he started the idea of good and bad. And a very instrumental character in RG's life was Radha Auntie, who makes him question the ideas of good and bad. Like whether the idea of arranged marriage, he knew the idea of arranged marriage is perfect, and when Radha Auntie has an affair, he first questions it. Then he sees that there is a lot of it's not as simple as it seems. A lot of factors come with it. So that was instrumental in RG's development. And just to materialize the point a bit more, I would just like to end with one more point. That is a very important turning point for me was when RG realizes his feelings. Am I audible? Am I audible? Yeah. So like when RG realizes his true feelings for Principal Black Tie, like he sees that Principal Black Tie is constantly punishing Shehan for not very not huge offenses that he does, but he's just punishing Shehan. So he reaches out to a teacher when the teacher says that Black Tie is probably the only hope for Tamilians like him. So then he sits and thinks that if black ties, he just cannot end up associating black ties cruelty with the idea of good or hope. He feels that black tie and the vice principal are equal amounts of bad, just their ways are bad, just their ways are different. So what he does is in an ultimate form of protest, he messes up the poem and he chooses his own narrative of good and bad and does not think about the repercussions which might come after he does that. And that's how he builds his own belief of good and bad and rejects what the world wants him to believe. So this development of RG, this psychological development of RG really stood up for me in the whole novel. So this was like my point of focus for me. So thank you.
Very interesting, Rohini. Different reading. I've never thought of the psychology of RG's understanding of race so early in the piece. But yeah, something to think about. Dr. Roma Bhattacharya, are you there? Hello, Roma. Roma, please unmute yourself. Yes, looking forward. Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Roma. Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hello.
Go ahead. We can
All right.
hear you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, Bengal Club and Julie D, and thank you so much for inviting me. Funny Boy moved me deeply. I felt a complete insider, having been a South Asian child myself. I'm very familiar with Tamil family mores. Later, as a United Nations global expert on gender development and armed conflict, I visited both the Sinhala and Tamil part of Sri Lanka. I stayed on Gaul Road and have eaten hoppers and delicious Sri Lankan curry. But most importantly, I understand the inscape of the novel, its interior world. Owing to the paucity of time, I will make two short comments. I will gloss over the obvious themes of power and social hierarchy, gender and race, ethnic violence, civil war, and the final grand finale of utter human loss of home, identity, exile, and refugeedom in Canada. The exploration of gender and power are very subtle and intimate, exploring beyond stereotypes, the illusion of a young boy embracing the feminine, not just as an act of cross-dressing or exploration of his homosexual identity, but as an experience of transfiguration, ascension into his higher, imaginative, artistic, perfect self. Even in the midst of the rapture of first love and intimacy, there is a hierarchy where perhaps Shehan does to him what the head prefect does to Shehan. Coming of age and moving away from boyhood to adolescence, he painfully learns that every step is a rupture of the bonds of familiarity. And even his love is forbidden and separates him from his Amma and puts him on a path that the family cannot follow. Even the demonized Tamil tigers are made human and part of an interrogation of racial injustice that Conversations with Jagan reveal. However, for me, what makes Funny Boy a truly post-colonial novel is not just a matter of content, but style. Kurtzi and Pico Iyer, whom we have discussed earlier, albeit being post-colonials, in my view, subject their worlds to a male analytical gaze shaped by the Western academy and derived from a Socratic education. Kurtzi's novel abounds in allusions to classical and European literature, and Ayer's Japan and exploration of self and time are not unknown in the ancient world of Greece and Rome. It is a male gaze turned upon South Africa and Japan. Shyam's Salvatore, in contrast, writes a novel of sentience, where the ebb and flow of the emotions of a young, sensitive Sri Lankan boy become both form and content. In my view, the novel is truly post-colonial or rooted in the South, in that it centers human emotions as a primary way of connecting, bonding, and even of understanding. Sentience and the affective world is the sight that reveals to us what it means to be truly human. It is the opposite of post-Cartesian enlightenment. We learn of the larger themes of gender, race, exile, and loss through the real and palpable emotions of a young Sri Lankan boy. Human subjectivity is recovered and brought to the center. This is what makes Funny Boy different. It captures in essence what it means to be in post-colonial South Asia, beyond geography and race. Thank you.
Spellbinding and new. Again, I think that is why these discussions that we have at the book club, at the Bengal Club, bring out so many little nuggets which are hidden away and embedded, which can only be ferreted out by different people with different pairs of lenses. Thank you so much, Roma. That was really very compelling. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Can we, Gurudash, may we have Melanie's little clip that we have?
Yes, ma'am.
Melanie is actually a young scholar, and I want you to hear the youngest scholar we have who's responded to Funny Boy. And then we'll move on to a few more people.
You know, I just never really been. I just never really been too bothered by being boxed, you know, as a gay writer, South Asian writer, Sri Lankan writer. I think that the work I know transcends its boxes. I've been writing as a published writer for almost 25 years now, and I'm still writing. I'm still here. My name is Shyam Salvatore.
Gurudash.
Yes, ma'am.
Gurudash, this is Shyam. Shyam in another interview. Sorry, I think the one which says Melanie, a video clip. If you don't have that.
No, ma'am, I don't have that.
Are you sure? It's the last one I sent. It's one of the last ones I sent you.
Okay, just a minute.
Just have a look. In the meantime, while you look for it, maybe we can have Raka. Will you do a short response, please? Raka Mukherjee. She is final year MA at Loreto College. Go for it.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, Raka.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and a very good evening to everyone present there. And so my response today will be on the first chapter. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
We lost you for a while, Raka. Can you maybe...
Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the very first chapter. It's called... Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. So it was a problem with my Bluetooth. I apologize for that. So today I'm going to speak about the very first chapter, and mostly because of my interest in gender theory and queer theory. And I think what really I take back from Funny Boy is how Salvatore is establishing a realistic picture of sexuality which challenges heterosexual monopoly to write imagined genders. We begin in the first chapter and we see, for me, the primary attraction of the girls' territory was the potential for the free play of fantasy. This begins with the exciting game called Bride that we see the cousins play together. And the hierarchy of the bride being the most respectable role and the groom being the most inferior. And this hierarchy is altered once the cousin, Tanuja, comes in and she challenges and steps up in the role of the groom. And then all the cousins protest and they say, the groom is not supposed to say anything. And she says, I want to be the bride. And there, what I take back is Judith Butler's comment on gender performativity, where we see Butler say that if the body is not a being but a variable boundary, a surface whose permeability is politically regulated, a signifying practice within a cultural field of gender hierarchy and compulsory heterosexuality, then what language is left for understanding the corporeal enactment gender that constitutes its interior signification on its surface? So the stylistics of existence, as Foucault would say, and the stylistics of flesh, as Bivet would say, that you are supposed to perform and act your gender. The heteronormative society tells you how to act, tells you to choose cricket over the game of bride, tells you, dictates you to become the groom because you are a boy. And we see that even the little girl Tanuja, her characteristics are described to be masculine, but it is RG's effeminate characteristics that is publicly reprimanded, and he is called the funny one. So I think that is where what I question is, so who are we? Are we somewhere in the space where we will be dictated right from our biological sex whether we should choose pink or blue, cricket or the game of bride? And later, as a lot of the speakers spoke about it, as RG grows, he realizes that there is a guilt inside him for the way he feels about dressing up, feels about his sexual orientation. And because we are talking about lived experiences today, it took me to a stand-up comic called Hannah Gadsby. Hannah Gadsby said that, the first time I discovered that I was a lesbian, it was because I felt guilty. I felt that I was doing a crime. And the guilt stays. And that is exactly why when RG later on develops feelings for the boy Sehan, and the first sexual intercourse that they have, he feels dirty. So as rightly pointed out by Rohini, that the psychological implications that heteronormative society puts on us, and there has been a lot of debates, but the masculinity is never challenged. So for us, I would actually like to say that Salvatore actually made pigs fly in this novel. So that is what I take back. I take back that Salvatore encourages to reclaim one's identity from this novel. So thank you so much, and thank you for giving.
Thank you, Raka. That was, as usual, stellar. Met the expectations of gender and patriarchy and how they work together to tell us what to do. It's always that classical master-servant relationship. I think if we take the argument one more step to Foucault and the issues about power. Roshni, are you around? Roshni Subramani?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening. Go ahead.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. It's been a pleasure listening to everybody over here. I'm yet to complete the novel, of course. I'm just, I think, 1.5 chapters away. But the journey that I've had has been just spectacular. I was just looking upon certain pieces of writing by Salvatore, and I came across a particular quote, So I just want to quote him. The magic of fiction seems to be the more specific you are, the more universal you end up becoming. So there are just two lines that I would like to say about this and about how this novel becomes universal. We've already discussed about how contemporary it is. The issues are so contemporary. We are still fighting over a lot of things which have been discussed in the book. Obviously, there are many categories into which this book is divided into. The politics about ethnicity and religion has not changed. The politics regarding patriarchy has not changed. What made me emotional was how it manifests itself in so many spaces. I mean, patriarchy manifests itself in many forms, whether it is in Ammachi or whether it is in Archie's father or mother, because the relationship they share also, probably there are many instances when Archie's mother is not involved into issues which are taken up by Archie's father. And there was one thing which struck me was the issue of violence, which is not only in the public sphere, but also domestic violence. So domestic violence in the sense, the way RG is beaten up in his childhood by his grandmother, how Ammachi acts as a matriarch, how issues of caste reigns throughout the novel, where Ammachi doesn't allow intercaste marriage between Anil and Radha, where Radha is treated as a second-class citizen, RG is treated as a second-class citizen. Most importantly, the power of education which Radha had with her, she was able to use it, but to what use? That is what Salvatore presents to us. So these are certain universal issues which are still going on and we still continue to struggle with. So I think what I felt is that this book, this work of art, is a site of activism. Whether you say, people, activists regarding patriarchy, activists regarding LGBTQIA, or activists regarding, Black Lives Matter. It's an extraordinary example. I mean, it is almost like a venue for justice, that you can feel it. I have not yet finished the novel, but at every chapter, this is what I feel. So for me, innumerable voices have been presented through a single book, and I have just enjoyed reading it, ma'am. So I just hope to finish it soon and talk to you about it a little more. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshni. Again, very refreshing reading. And this is the point that is discussed all over academia. When we talk about othering, when we talk about alterity, when we talk about how we treat a stranger who comes to our door, that's Pico Iyer's phrase, but Rohini, I can see you nodding your head. That's a phrase that we talk about in the Canadian Academy a lot, because we are supposed to be the world's most multicultural society. But as I said right from the start, we are not walking the talk at all. But for me, what I think is problematic with this book is that it doesn't do the usual simplistic, I'm treated badly, I've come to Canada, why am I being treated as a minority? But it brings to focus more about the differences we have in our own places of birth. And need I say more than to say, look at the Dalit voices today, that are coming up. And if you want activism, there's activism for you, who are telling their stories in their own voices. As long ago, Raja Rao had said when he was writing Kantapura way back in 1936, and saying the colonial master's language is our language, but we are going to use it to talk about our problems and our glories and our ceremonial greatness. And I think that's what the minority is doing all over the world today. They're waking up, and I think Roshni's point is a good point to hang on to and look at this as a work of art of activism. And all the issues which have been brought forth on the table today, I am so grateful to all of you for bringing out aspects which I've been teaching this novel for 8 years in the Canadian Academy. It never occurred to me, so many things that so many of us have brought out. We have time, so if there's anyone who wants to jump in there and talk about Funny Boy or related issues about Salvatore, we would love to hear you.
May I go? Yeah, I haven't spoken, so...
Yes, Shutapa, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So, this is a book which I had actually read many years ago, Funny Boy. And, after that, I remember liking the book enough to have immediately gone on to reading Cinnamon Gardens. And I've read the other Sri Lankan authors as well, Romesh Gunasekaran and Dache. So to me, when I said, I want to sort of speak about this book, and yesterday after a long day's work, I actually picked up the book and I started reading and thinking that I'll sort of quickly glance through the book. And it's a telling comment on the book that it is a riveting narrative, that it holds you. And I'm always very curious about something that I've read ages back, what it does to me now. So this I would have read at least 15, 18 years ago. And that the fact that the hold is as strong means something, right? And I've done it with many other books, and it's always not the same thing. So to me, a book which is good, moving to a very good to a very great, comes from, one is the narrative, which holds you then. The second is, after you finish reading the book, is when the layers kind of unravel, as it were. And there are many layers in this book. And to me, a good book, may be very topical, but it stays within the boundaries that it sets for itself. A very good book or a great book transcends that. And to me here, it's not transcending just in terms of topicality or how contemporary it is. It certainly is. I mean, you know, the whole us and them and the othering can be applied, you know, from a majority minority perspective to India and to many other countries and in the polarization that we see all around. But to me, it goes even beyond that. And it does it in a very charming way, because, you know, the whole book is written from the lens, from the eyes of a kid growing up between the ages of whatever, 7, 8, or 9 to about maybe 15 or 16. And through little incidents, which have obviously made a huge impression on him. So to me, it's a telling comment on the human condition itself, because we, you know, go through a gamut of human emotions, from loss to guilt to separation to anxiety, and of course the whole process, because it's a child, of discovery. And you kind of, to me again, a great piece of literature and literary merits come in when you're kind of lifted from the moorings of your own life and you kind of move into the life of the boy. And to me, this was the second time it actually happened, where you actually are seeing everything through those eyes and, you know, appreciating it for what it was. And there are many things which are very striking and quite profound. I mean, the little boy discovering what power is through, you know, that there's, I think, a page where he actually, you know, gets the realization about black tie making the rules, his father making the rules. So there's power. There is this whole, you know, of course, he's a wordsmith. Somebody else said it's extremely well written. So there are tons of phrases which kind of stay in your mind. The relationship with, you know, Shehan. There is, you know, a line, I think, which says towards the end of the book when he comes to meet him, where he says he realized he is Sinhalese. And he says, nothing changes, but I see him through a, you know, through, I think it's a film of a translucent film, which is a really nice way of actually putting it. And finally, the last point, you know, of late I've been reading a lot of Andre Aciman, Call Me By Your Name, Enigma Variations, Find Me. And he's a writer who writes fairly graphically about physical intimacy. And those writings are both lyrical and intensely beautiful. And I'm really, really happy when I read this book, and I'm sort of rereading it after many years, that Shyam Salvatore doesn't shy away from exploring that and exploring that in an extremely sensual way. So I'll stop there.
Wow, Shutapa, I'm going to corral you in for all our book discussions. Wonderful, wonderful. Great points, great books do stay with us beyond boundaries, beyond issues of social, political, cultural boundaries, absolutely. Moitri, I think I saw you here. Are you there, Moitri? Moitri? Okay, maybe we'll come back. In the meantime, Shebonti, would you like to say something in response? Shebonti is our librarian who's been with the Bengal Club for nearly 20 years now. And she's a big reader, voracious. Shebonti, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. Right at the beginning, I would like to thank you very much for selecting Shyam Salvatore's book for this evening's discussion. My journey with Sri Lankan authors began with Naomi Munewara's book, Island of 1,000 Neighbors. And the first time I read it, I was just mesmerized. Later on, I read Ramesh Gunasekera, and then comes Shyam Salvatore. Now, I would like to focus on the conflict that this particular book deals with. Now, this particular book doesn't deal with only the political conflict between the Sinhalese and the Tamils, but it also talks about the boy RG when he refuses to play cricket with boys of his own age, and he chooses to play the bride game. this is how possibly a little boy is challenging the social rule, the social norms, and he creates a world of his own. He moves into imagination, and very tactfully, the author has dealt with this theme of conflict. I don't. Already, many of the important points of this book has been covered by the earlier speakers. So I would just like to say that the more I have read Sham Salvatore, my urge to visit this verdant island has increased. Although I have never been to Sri Lanka physically, I would love to visit that place because whatever I have read, not only in Salvadore's works, but in the works of Ramesh Gunasekara and Naomi Munewara, they have really tempted me to visit this island and to know more about our neighboring country. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sheponti. Nice roundup. I'm still waiting to see if there's anybody else. Hussaina, Mohini, anybody want to say anything? All quiet on this front. Okay. Nitin?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Mohini. Yes, Mohini.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I didn't get a chance to complete the novel, but from what I gather till now, it's a whole host of multiple ideas brought together, ma'am, as everybody else has stated as well. And this is something that it's a mark of a great novel. This complete multiplicity of ideas brought together in such a harmonious way. That is, the patriarchal conditions and the gender issues, and then after that, the political conflicts, as Dr. Harish so well explicated, and it was so informative. And also, I particularly feel that this idea of finding one's own self in one's own identity within the purview of their own family is something that is very relatable. It doesn't always pertain to gender, but it also to see where you stand in your own family is something that all of us at some point of time in our lives can relate to. Like recently when I was listening to a podcast, and there were these American speakers, like they were from the US, and they were talking about how comical they felt that people from Asian countries, they have to seek the approval for their parents for certain things. And then they got messages saying back that, yes, this is something that we have to live with. We have to gain the acceptance of our parents. We have to look into the fact that, there are some things that we can't do on our own for the fear of losing the love and respect that we crave from our family. So this thing about this entire thing of the concept of the novel is so beautifully integrated, and just the short clip also that was played of Sham Salvatore, it also speaks about how this is a part of his lived experience, and also the fact that it is a lived experience of many of us, especially Asian readers. And we have to look at these tropes in some point of the other in our lives, and I think that that's what makes this book a very special piece.
Thank you, Mohini. Thank you for your contribution. I want to share one slide, one image with you, and then I will give you guys another chance to jump in and say anything you want after you've seen this image. Ideas of diaspora, citizenship, belonging, not belonging, ostracization, all that comes in, I think. Gurudash, can we play can we show that one image of that protest?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So I want to sort of end with this because I think it speaks to us about the current situation, as current as a few years ago. I think this was 2009 on the Spadina Expressway, and I was held on this entry to the exit ramp to go home from University of Toronto for 5 hours. I think I reached home at about midnight, because these were Tamilians, Sri Lankan Tamilians - Canadians. So many were refugees, many were immigrants who were protesting the killings of their families in Jaffna. It was absolutely, I was gobsmacked. Let me tell you, I kid you not, in class, you had unheard of at the University of Toronto, always such a happy atmosphere, very accepting. And the class was divided after this happened. I think Harish touched upon this. And I lived through sitting in class and having the white Canadian contingent in my class literally look back at my Sri Lankan students and say, why don't you go back home or take this baggage back? It just doesn't belong here. Why are you disrupting the orderliness of Canada and the rest of the world? If you have a problem, you don't belong here. You know, these problems of yours are from your homeland. Also, I would like to point out that I was very surprised when, see, these things are lived experience, and this is what connects the reader to the writer. There were incidents where Sinhalese and Tamilian Canadians were at loggerheads. Young people in a Xerox store which was owned by Sinhalese. Tamil students went to get photocopies done and were refused and told to get out of here. So the issues that Shyam talks about and the point that Shutopa just made is that great books capture the universality. Who was the person here who talked about the local and the global connection? Somebody here spoke about how the smallest details of the author's representation relate to the universal world. Somebody talked about that. I can't remember who. And I think that's a point that I take from this novel, as I do from most of the diasporic Canadian novelists' works. It's always about how those little things matter and how you really question. So what do I do now? Where do we go now with these problems in our homeland? When you're a student at the University of Toronto and you hear that your grandmother has been killed in Jaffna, are you going to sit and say, well, I'm not going to bring that baggage here? These are the things that beleaguer us, that challenge us to think about citizenship and belonging or not belonging. Thank you for being here. Really chuffed that we unpackaged such wonderful goodies, starting with Choitali Moitro. Professor Moitro, thank you again for always being there.
Can I just put in one more word? It'll be 1 minute.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that this is not a place to categorize gender issues, but the novels like The Passion of the New Eve of Angela Carter and The Female Man are also having the identity crisis issue. But together with these two novels and me being a Bengali, I am reminded of Maya Mridongo of Shoyad Mustafa Siraj and the film Nagor Kirtan. All these renditions are finally very dystopic and they become circuitous. But I think The Funny Boy is able to connect more global issues, as you have been talking just now about. So thank you again for choosing this book and making this meet happen, Julie.
Thank you, everyone. This is your last chance to speak or forever hold your peace. All of you who have come here, I am extremely grateful for all you've given us. And those of you who've listened so intently, thank you also. We'll be in touch with all of you about the next book and hope to see you in February.
Thank you for a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Julie.
you so much, ma'am. It
Good
was
night.
great.
Thank you so
Good
much.
night. See you again.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. That was fabulous.
Enjoyed myself.